Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to the SportsLine Model Show. I'm your host, Mackenzie Brooks, joined by the team behind the numbers, Steven, Derek, John, and Jake. We have a great show lined up, as always. We'll hit our MLB daily picks. We'll hit some NFL win totals, and then we have a tease later. We'll hit some fantasy, and we want to get to your guys' questions. I will be in the chat looking for them, so whatever you guys want, we will be here to answer. But before we get there, let's start with our classic MLB daily picks with John and Jake. They will break it down for us. So we will head over to the model and get started here.
Yeah, fancy new graphic, Mackenzie. Well done.
Thank you guys. I wonder who the producer is. She's probably so cool.
But we'll go into MLB first. We'll let Jake start us off since he's got a play on the Astros here. You want to go, Jake?
Yeah, so we didn't have a ton of value today. This is the only game with like more than 5% value. And so right now we have it as an A with it at minus 124. But if it changes, it'd probably go down to a B. But I like this pick a lot. I like the Astros minus 130 versus the Marlins. You get it minus 125 on DraftKings now. It's gone down, which surprised me. If you look at Johnny Cueto versus Christian Javier and you see the Astros are at minus 130, you might double take that. I mean, yes, the Marlins have won 5 of the 6, but 2 of those games were against the Yankees team who can't hit and a Reds team. And then yesterday they took the first game against the Astros. But, like, I mean, Cueto, you know what you're going to get from Cueto. 5-6 innings, 3-4 runs. Christian Javier, he's been pretty consistent as well, but his upside's more he's a lot more upside than Johnny Cueto. I really like the Astros here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Jake. The other thing to look at is the Marlins bullpen. So Tanner Scott threw, I believe it was 35 or 38 pitches yesterday, so he's not going to be available today. They have another one of their relievers who's pitched 2 days in a row. I believe it's Jorge Lopez pitched 2 days in a row. So he's like
Jorge Lopez got the win against the Yankees, yeah, and then he pitched yesterday, yeah.
Yep. And so the Marlins bullpen is a little thin right now, and it's been way worse than the Astros, whereas the Astros will have everyone available in their bullpen. Christian Javier is obviously the wild card there, so it'll be interesting to see how he pitches, but he should dominate a Marlins team that struggles against righties.
Yeah, and we have some questions in the chat coming from Jason. He has a few, so before we get anywhere, let's get to these soon, but he wants to talk about the recency bias in the role with the models.
That's a good question for Steven. Steven, does it weigh does the model weigh recent games more than, say, your games 2 months ago?
Yes, but not extremely more. And it has a bigger impact on rookies or players with smaller sample size as opposed to players like Altuve has been playing for a long time.
And yeah, Altuve has been on fire lately. I think if a lot of you guys follow Prize Picks, I think he's hit his Prize Picks number something like 8 or 9 times in a row.
He's been making me some money.
Yeah, he's been on a roll lately. If you're looking at any Jose Altuve props, I think that's a good option.
Now, I do think pitchers, it has a much bigger impact because of the way it's fewer samples.
Makes sense. Yeah, the sample's way smaller.
And like a player like Altuve, if he's struggling, it could be the opposite effect that maybe we haven't projected higher than you would expect. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it definitely does take it into account. I know, especially when it comes to home run props, I noticed that when a player's on fire, sometimes the model takes that into account.
Yeah, and Jake Allen's asking about Red Sox Nationals, which we actually do have a pick on, John. Nationals run line plus 1.5 versus the Red Sox at Barstool, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. Barstool. Good segue into one of our other games. We got Barstool. They've got the money line at plus 150, which I also like, but we've got value on the run line here, about minus 110, so just the juice there. So the Nationals have been on fire lately, guys. Josiah Gray has struggled in his past couple starts, but he's more than capable of having a good game at any time, which is usually what you want in a big underdog, a guy who's capable of pitching really well. The Red Sox have been crushing righties for about a month and a half or so, but most recently they're ranked just 10th in weighted on base average since the All-Star break, which is still very good, but they had been first. So what that tells me is they haven't been as good against righties in the past couple of weeks. And that passes the eye test as well, because you have guys like Jarren Duran, lefties like Jarren Duran, Rafael Devers, who have been struggling a little bit, whereas you have guys, your righties like Justin Turner and Trevor Story back in the lineup who are hitting. So that would help more against your lefties, not your righties.
Right.
Nick Meta had been on a roll just about all season, but he's been very due for a bad outing. He's been showing signs of slowing down as well. He has 5 home runs allowed in his last 3 starts and 4 walks allowed in his last 2. Both teams will have all their relievers available after the off day, but the Nationals are 17-12 since the All-Star break and 10-2 at home. That's over a month of sample there. So the Nats are on fire right now. The Red Sox are just 14-13 since the All-Star break and 5-7 on the road in that time. I just think this is way too heavy of a line for the Red Sox. So I like the Nats at home here.
And I got to add one more thing. So you might expect a team like the Nationals, they're out of it. Why won't they just tank? Tanking is different than it was in baseball with the new CBA. So you're not really rewarded as much for tanking. Just like Oakland should have had the first pick last year. They got screwed and they had the 6th pick. So you're not going to be rewarded for tanking. So these teams aren't going to tank who are out of it.
So specifically, the Nats aren't allowed to pick. I believe it's in the top 10.
Top 10,
right?
yeah. You can't have a top 10 pick.
Exactly. So even if the Nats are, say, the 5th worst team in the league, they're not going to get the 5th overall pick. They're going to get bumped all the way back to, say, 10 at max. So Jake's right in that sense. There's no reason not to try to win these games, especially for a young team.
And you mentioned going against right-handed pitchers. When you're looking at the model, Stephen, if you could highlight where specifically the model is looking at those numbers. I know there's a lot to digest here on the screen.
The right-handed, so I use weighted on base average to look. So I don't think we have that specifically in the model, but I like to use weighted on base average, runs created, those advanced stats, because they take into account every outcome in a sense. Walks are equal to singles.
So I know I intentionally don't make things good for people to see on a screen, but the model, there's no visuals on that form that we see with those stats. But these are the numbers that we actually use that are driving the models behind the sims. And for every player, we have, kind of these proprietary stats based on righty lefty overall. And then that's what's being these little tables that are behind the scenes that you don't want to have to read. So right. Yeah, so we factor in it and have.
Yeah, that's where the model comes in handy, because it can do that work, and then we can double check by looking at the weighted on base averages, whereas the model just comes up with an output that we like.
Right. And I know,
believe it or not, this is the form that's supposed to be pretty for visual purposes.
This is as pretty as the
This is it. Don't ask
consider this a blessing.
Yeah.
But we actually have a parlay today from Jake. Braves money line, both teams to score over 2.5 runs. That can be plus 130 at DraftKings. This might be our first parlay of the show, I believe. So no pressure, but this is big.
Yeah, I had to find a way to fade my Yankees, especially with how good the Braves are. And with this weather, there's going to be a lot of runs scored. And with Severino versus Bryce Elder, and there's going to be a lot of runs scored as well. So I wanted to get an overplay somewhere. And I was looking at DraftKings, and you could play both teams to score more than 2.5 runs, and the Braves money line at plus 130, which I thought was a pretty decent parlay there. Severino has been the worst pitcher in baseball, particularly in the last couple of weeks, but if you put the whole season together, it's been awful. I think his best inning he's allowing has a 7 ERA in his best inning. It's been a little rough to watch, and with that Braves lineup, with this humidity outside, the balls are just going to be flying. I think for your Dinger Tuesday, you might want to bet a Matt Olson. I think he's at plus 280 on FanDuel. We have him at plus 284. So there's no value, but I think that might be a good play. He just missed a couple yesterday. And the Yankees actually hit Max Fried yesterday. They were putting the ball in play. They were getting some hits. So I think they could score 3, especially against Elder. They weren't really capitalizing yesterday, but I think more than 2.5 runs against the Yankees, against the Braves, is very doable against Bryce Elder.
And for those of you who have Prize Picks or use Prize Picks, there's something called a Tuesday Taco, where it's essentially just like a discount on one of their plays. And Matt Olson total bases has been bumped down to 0.5.
I already hit that. I'm all over that.
For those of you who are on Prize Picks, highly suggest taking that, because that's one of those where we likely would have been on it regardless. So then when we see the discount, we're obviously still going to take it. Whereas a lot of times when you see those promos, if you're not originally on it, I wouldn't suggest getting on it.
Happy birthday to Kabir.
Yeah, I saw that. And we had someone in the chat asking about Braves -1.5 at -115. Do you like that run line too, or sticking to the money line?
I like the run line, honestly, against Severino right now. Elder scares me a bit, but I mean, that Braves offense is scary. So I was looking at that, but I like the +130 parlay, or I like that as well. It's not a bad play either.
Right. It seems like we're one with the chat today. Someone also asked about Rockies Diamondbacks, which we were also thinking about too. We're all becoming one, guys. This is pretty cool. We're only 5 episodes in. So boys, take it away.
Yeah, y'all are starting to read my mind now. I mean, this is one of those plays where I thought nobody would be thinking of it, and somebody's already bringing it up. But yeah, so I love Rockies on the money line here today. This is one of those nasty plays that you kind of don't really realize that you like it until you start doing your research, and you're like, this many things are going our way. Well, Joe Mantiply is opening the game for the Diamondbacks. He's the one who came in yesterday and ended up blowing the lead for the Diamondbacks when they were up 4-2. He gave up 3 hits and recorded just 1 out before he was removed. He's opening today. So he obviously doesn't have a good impression after yesterday. He's going to have to come out, throw some strikes, and get some outs today. But the D-backs are expected to go with either Slade Caccione, who has made just 2 career appearances, and 1 was solid, or Bryce Jarvis, who would be making his major league debut after him, or they could go a full bullpen game if they don't want to use one of these young guys. But either way, it's either a bullpen game for the worst bullpen in the league since the All-Star break, or it's a rookie pitching at Coors Field for his first time ever. So the Diamondbacks pitching is not in a good spot today regardless at all. And Ty Blach is starting for the Rockies. He's pitched really well since being added to the rotation. The D-backs also haven't seen him yet this season, and they're slightly worse against lefties since the All-Star break, ranked just 21st in weighted on base average. The Rockies bullpen is also going to have everyone available. The Rockies are 12-16 since the All-Star break, 6-6 at home. The Diamondbacks are 7-21 since the All-Star break, and 3-14 on the road. That's honestly unbelievable for a team that's honestly still in the playoff race right now. 7-21 since the All-Star break, 3-14 on the road. There's just a ton of value on the Rockies here, and I think they could easily win this series.
And from what I remember, the model does not like rookie pitchers. Am I correct on that?
You're very correct. So there's the model doesn't like rookie pitchers in general, but most specifically their first, I believe it's 5 starts, right, Steven?
The first 5 starts are downgrade. We don't have an A pick unless we love it. We'll upgrade it. And unless there's like a stud pitcher that's pitching as a rookie, maybe Paul Skeens in a couple of years, we go in manually, but adjust him. But yeah, for the most part, it's not going to like rookie pitchers.
Right. Yeah. So chat, keep asking your baseball questions. We will get to them. We got to get to Jake's Dinger Tuesday props, however. So first one we have is Shohei Ohtani home run, a fan favorite.
Yeah, I like Ohtani today at +390. We have him at +348 to homer. His home run rate is a little lower against lefties than righties, but he has 10 home runs and like 114 at bats against lefties. So he's still hitting lefties decent about. Jordan Montgomery hasn't been as good in his last couple starts. I think it's a good matchup in Texas for Ohtani, and I think he's still pushing for 60, and he needs to catch a little fire again. And I like that +390.
Right. And Jake Allen was asking about the Angels money line. Are you staying away from this game, or do we have any value here?
Yeah, I'd just probably stay away. I was looking into this game. I wanted to play something. I don't mind an overplay. What do you think about an overplay at 8.5, John?
So I was looking at this. I would probably lean Rangers on the money line, even though it's juicy. The only thing that worries me is, I don't know if you saw this, Jake, but Phil Nevin was fired up in the dugout yesterday at his team, yelling at his team because they were getting blown out by a division rival. And I don't know if they'll have some sort of response, come out and play with their heads on fire today. That's really my only worry here. But Lucas Giolito struggles with home runs and walks. And what do the Rangers do? Walk and hit home runs. So I just think it's a great matchup for the Rangers. And then if you look at these teams since the trade deadline as well, the Rangers are the second best team in terms of win total. And the Angels are the second worst. So these teams are trending in complete opposite directions. I think it's worth the juice. And I think even if the Rangers lose today, then you can just come back and play the Rangers tomorrow to win the series.
Right.
You like I thought 8.5 is a little low, especially with Giolito. He got shelled his last outing. We have 10.2 runs, so we have the overhitting almost 65% of Sims. I thought that could be a play, especially in Texas.
Yeah, I don't mind it because the Angels are definitely better against lefties, but Jordan Montgomery, like you remember from last year after he was traded right after the trade deadline, he was on a roll. Like I have a feeling he's going to do something similar this year where after he gets traded, he just all of a sudden goes on a tear. And like I said, my main worry is that Phil Nevin tore into his players yesterday and they would have some sort of response. But at the same time, the Angels have looked terrible. I believe they're 3-10 since the trade deadline. So,
yeah. And we'll take one more question from the chat for the MLB. Spencer asking about a strikeout prop, which we haven't done in a while, if you guys want to get to that.
Yeah, so this is a tough one for me because Kikuchi is that guy who's in the past has always come out and pitched, say, 2 really good outings, and then his third is just terrible. And there's no consistency whatsoever. But this year, he's found a ton of consistency. My only thing is the Phillies are pretty good against lefties. They're one of the best teams since the All-Star break. So I don't know if they'll be striking out a ton. And then I also don't know if Kikuchi will be going deep enough in this game to get that total. So I don't know if I would probably lean under there, to be honest. But Kikuchi's been proving me wrong all season as well. So
yeah, Steven's highlighting it, if he was on the road, his under is 18-5 on the road, so that would look a lot better. But he is at home, 8-12, so it depends on the juice. The juice probably is right around 40%. So I'd probably stay off, but yeah, you don't know what you're gonna get out of Kikuchi.
So the model likes the under as well.
The model likes the under as well. Yeah.
Nice. It's always good when the eye test matches up with the model. That's what we love to see.
Combination of data and person expertise, which is always important to add to this.
The ideal combination.
And the last home run prop of the day is Pete Alonso. We have he's at plus 320 to homer on FanDuel. We have him at plus 226, so there's a ton of value there. I like the matchup against Bailey Falter. He's 1 for 4 against Falter in his career with a home run. I just think it's a good matchup for him. Anytime he faces a lefty, I like it.
Right. All right. Well, we have plenty of Dinger Tuesday options, a couple of run lines, a couple of money lines. We have it all. We're going to hop over to our NFL segment. For those who don't remember, we're going through all 32 NFL teams. We're looking at their over. We're seeing what we have projected, and then we're saying, okay, what scenarios would it take for these teams to hit this over, or the best case scenario for every team. So if you are a fan of Dallas, Buffalo, Cincinnati, or San Francisco, this show is for you. So we're going to get into our NFL overs, and we're going to start with Dallas. I'm going to get them out of the way as a Philly fan.
And as always, everyone asks questions in the chat, and we'll be answering those for baseball people.
Yes, we're sending John and Jake into the chat. Go be free. So we'll start with Dallas Cowboys. Their line is 9.5. We have them projected at 9.3 wins. So pretty similar scenario. So we have 2 situations that we think could confidently get them over this 9.5. But that starts with a few baseline assumptions to even get us to this 9.3. And that includes Tony Pollard being able to handle this increased workload with Elliott out of here. And then we have Cooks. The upgrade of him needs to offset the loss of Dalton Schultz. So, Steven, that is what already takes us to 9.3 wins, correct?
Yeah, so well put. But basically, so in this scenario, the next scenario you want to run is what if, you could say statistically Pollard per touch is is reminiscent of Zeke Elliott his rookie year. And Dak Prescott's, as a rookie with an awesome offensive line, and Zeke was able to have his career high in passer rating, and they had their 13 wins together. So we're saying statistically, can this combination of this year's Dak with experience and Pollard be reminiscent of rookie Dak and rookie Zeke? And if they are that good, which is not inconceivable, then you see this significant over the 9.5 wins, and they start becoming take the division away from the Eagles.
Right.
Yeah. So with Tony Pollard, the last 2 years, his yards per carry was 5.02, and then the previous year before that was 5.5. And that's only last year. It was only on 198 carries for the entire season. So he has a little bit under the 322 carries that Zeke did in his rookie season. However, he does make up for it in pass catching. So when having Dak being more of the passer rating as he was back in Zeke's rookie year, then you add in the additional amount of receptions for Pollard. Instead of taking that beating of the 300 plus carries, he'll have probably about 250 or so, but he'll receive the ball more, which he does a little bit better. He has more explosion than Zeke does. So when you add those together, and then also Pollard is going to be a little bit more fresh because Deuce Vaughn's
been doing well in the preseason game.
Yeah, he's been getting rave reviews in the offseason, like in the training camps. And then this past preseason game, he had 50 yards rushing with the actual touchdown. And then he did okay with the receiving. But if he can be that explosive whenever he spells Pollard in the offense, then they should be able to still rack up, enough yards and enough receptions. We just have to see it against a better kind of defense. So hopefully this week he'll be able to play against like more second teamers, first teamers for the defense that they play this week on the Cowboys. So if they both of those guys get to the same amount of production as Ezekiel Elliott, they have a good chance of hitting over. Right.
And it's important to see, we see their wins increasing as we go through these scenarios, but also their chances to win the division. Starting at 27% and now almost at 40. So, there's other things other than just win totals you can look at here. Our odds for them to win the division or win the conference as well start to increase. But scenario 2, to take this team to 10.8 wins, so over that 9.5, would be Mazi Smith playing like peak Fletcher Cox. He's been having great, strong training camp reports. Draft comps were similar to Fletcher Cox. And the thing is, he could probably anchor this interior line if he plays to the best of his ability.
Yeah, so the Cowboys are already an elite at forcing turnovers, and with Michael Parsons, they can rush the passer. So they are one of the best teams in passer rating allowed overall. So their only non-strength from last year was yards per carry allowed, which is a tough one when you talk about San Francisco and Philadelphia being the primary competition in the NFC. Right. So Mazi Smith, who came in and made headlines for saying he didn't really like football, he just liked hurting people, I'm paraphrasing. And he's been playing well in camp. So if he can shore up that middle of the defense and make Dallas's run defense a top 10 unit, allow around 4 or 4.1 yards per carry, then you have this truly they take over the significant edge over even Philadelphia for the division because of that run defense against Philadelphia.
Yeah, and they also have a good secondary, so people don't normally like to throw Diggs' way. So when you add that together with improved rush defense, they can be a pretty nasty defense coming up this season.
Right. And we move over to the other side of the NFC. We talk about the 49ers. We actually had them at 11.4 wins. Their line's at 10.5, so that's a pretty big deal for the model. But this is all in the assumption that Brock Purdy remains an efficient quarterback. Obviously, we didn't see a full season of him, so that will be a big if, but that's what we're going to assume. And we're also going to assume that this defense is still top 3 in points allowed. That's another big part of this team being at 11.4.
Yeah, we already have a lot of value on them with the Super Bowl, nearly 17% in the model and plus 850
Mm-hmm.
I saw at Caesars the other day. That implies only 10.5%. So we have a lot. They're our favorite pick basically for Super Bowl value.
Right, and it's good for people to know. 17% chance to win the Super Bowl in the model is a very large amount, given how hard it is to predict that. But we move to the scenarios that would take them slightly over that to 11.7 is just those road turnovers.
Yeah, it was hard to find weaknesses. For all these, I was looking for some obvious weakness that they could improve on.
Right.
And for the 49ers, they led the league in point differential, which is obviously not everything, but it's pretty significant when you're talking point spreads. The only thing that I saw in their splits was on the road, they only averaged 23 points a game. And it's because they turned the ball over at twice the rate. So I know Derek's got some impressive numbers about, obviously Purdy was a very low interception quarterback but most of his games were at home. So we'll see if that translates. And then more importantly, their running backs, last 4 years, Eli Mitchell has never lost a fumble. And McCaffrey hasn't lost a fumble in 4 or 5 seasons. So when you have those players, we're assuming that San Francisco's road turnovers won't be an issue. And instead of averaging 23, 5 fewer points than they do at home, they might be more like a normal team, which is 2.5 under what they do on the road. And then you have this have already a dominant team winning over 20% of Super Bowl simulations.
Yeah, so Elijah Mitchell and Christian McCaffrey together with their touches is 1,277 touches throughout their careers when you combine them. They only lost 2 fumbles out of 6 fumbles that they had total together. So it's pretty much a good assumption of them not really turning the ball over when they even touch the ball. And so in the 3 games that they played last year together, they only had 1 turnover, which was Brandon Ayuk. When he caught the ball, he got spun around and then ended up fumbling, which is not usual for him. So when you have those 2 running the ball where you don't have to pass that much because you're eating up 5 to 10 yards per carry or reception, then you limit the amount of risk of having turnovers. Then Brock Purdy, he only had 1 interception in his interception on the road in the games that he played as a starter. They really don't turn the ball over when they ended up having either McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell together or just McCaffrey in the lineup. So that bodes well for them to get the over.
Right. Yeah.
So this is the more ridiculous scenario. I was trying to reach for things, and the thing that Kyle Shanahan recently said, why can't Sam Darnold be like Steve Young? Steve Young didn't start out his career that great in Tampa, and then he obviously became an MVP and Hall of Famer. So we're not. And then Brock Purdy, his passer efficiency, his quarterback rating was already led the league based on in the games that he played or started. So we're saying, what if Purdy stays healthy and instead of just being an ultra efficient game manager, actually becomes a 30 plus passing touchdown type player, or Sam Darnold, is the next Steve Young and fulfills his promises he had when he was drafted number 3. Or Trey Lance has to come in, and whether it's his legs or his arm, but most likely his legs, can be reminiscent of Steve Young, who had that. If you just Google his 49-yard run against Minnesota, I think you see what he used to do. So this, again, not realistic in my mind. But if the combination of these 3 form into this Voltron-like top 5 MVP candidate quarterback to go along with this defense and the running backs and everybody else they got, then you have a really uniquely dominant potential team with 27% Super Bowl percentage, which is an obscene number at this point in the year. Yeah.
And even if these scenarios don't work out, Zach's asking about McCaffrey's 7.5 rushing touchdowns at -105, which is actually pretty great value if you want to hop over to the model. And
let me see. We don't have value at that on the over. Okay. We have right around 6. Let me go to a view where we have decimal points.
Yeah, I have 6.4 that I found. Okay, so we're ready. It was 6.4 that we have in the database.
Yeah. So we don't like the over on that. And there's also, again, I think with the depth, they're not in any pressure to play McCaffrey 17 games.
Right.
And I do think that they, based on our sims, even though they have a first place schedule, with Arizona in a massive rebuild and the Rams probably in a massive rebuild, they actually have a fairly easy schedule. So this team outscored teams by 10 points a game last year. They could be up massively. And even though usually that bodes well for the running back to get extra touches, not in this team, not given his history and wanting to protect him. I think guys like Jordan Mason and RB3s might be getting some of these touchdowns late in games if they're up big and they decide to rest some of their starters and protect them.
Right. So the 49ers, they've been on record in this offseason that they were trying to have a 50-50 split between Elijah Mitchell and McCaffrey. So when if they actually do that, part of their word, then you will see McCaffrey is going to have a hard time getting to that 7.5, 7 number.
Yeah. From a rushing standpoint.
Rushing.
Yeah. If it's total touchdowns, then that's a different story. Right. Total touchdowns, we have them at let me do the math. 6.4. I can do this. 11. I had 6.4, 4.6 in my head. Right there in my head.
That's our data engineer, everyone.
No, I don't know what I am, but VP. Data engineering.
Yeah. All right. So we'll move over to the AFC. Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. We have them projected at 10.1 wins. The line at 11.5. We're already assuming that Burrow isn't even missing significant time with the calf injury. We're also already assuming that they're going to be allowing fewer sacks than they did in 2022.
Yep. So this is just, they're still not good at it, but they went from horrific and allowing the most sacks 2 years ago to being, I think, 22nd most. Yeah. So they went from really bad to just bad.
Yeah.
So the first scenario that we have is it comes down to Orlando Brown, and who his father was a great tackle, not left. He wants to play left tackle. That's why he got traded out of Baltimore. He played pretty well at left tackle in Baltimore when Ronnie Stanley was out. He was a great right tackle, run blocker. And then in Kansas City, obviously, he was the left tackle for the Super Bowl champions. So that's a good thing. But they didn't deem him as essential for their repeat. And the market doesn't deem him as a top 5 left tackle. But what if he is? And so in this case, let's just say he's come on record. He said that, not that Joe Burrow was better than Patrick Mahomes, but Joe Burrow doesn't freelance as much. And for a player like him, he knows where Joe is. And so implying that, he might be able to have an easier time reducing sacks with protecting Burrow as opposed to protecting Mahomes. Right. So let's just say that's the case, and Cincinnati becomes top 10 in fewest sacks allowed. Then you have their Super Bowl chances going way over from 6.2 to 11.2. It's a massive leap if he can be an elite left tackle.
Right.
So back in 2020, Orlando Brown only gave up 11 quarterback pressures, according to PFF. Last year, he gave up 51 pressures on Mahomes. And so that probably goes into the fact of him not knowing where Mahomes is going to be at. But if he does go back to the 2020 version of himself, then Joe Burrow will be very appreciative of having these people off of him instead of running for his life, as he did pretty much off of every single drop back from last year. And last year, the Bengals were second to last in the passing time allowed at 2.68. The average is 3 seconds. So they were giving Joe Burrow almost a good half a second less of time to throw the ball. So if he can solidify that tackle position, then Joe Burrow will have a little bit more time to pass it to the very elite wide receiving core that he has.
Right. And we'll move over. We'll get through this. This is our last one before we head to fantasy wide receivers. We'll talk about the Buffalo Bills. We're basically pretty much in line with the odds makers, 10.5 versus our 10.6. Baseline assumptions is that you lose Devin Singletary, but you have year 2 James Cook and you have Harris, which should offset that loss. And then you have, the year 1 impact from Dalton. Is it Kincaid?
Kincaid, yeah.
So I thought, all right. And then we're hoping that this Diggs drama really isn't a factor. At this point, it should all be settled. That is the assumption to get them to these 10.6 wins.
Yeah, again, the Bills were the season ended horribly for them, but they were second to San Francisco in point differential, almost right on 10 a game. So they were statistically dominant,
right?
Already.
Yeah.
But the first scenario here is, what if Kincaid, who was the only first round tight end drafted, what if he is another, not Kelsey-ish, but Mark Andrews, those kind of elite receiving tight end. And so you have Diggs, a top 3 wide receiver, and you have or top 5, however you want to talk about it, and you have Kincaid as a top 5 tight end to go along with who they already have there. And then you still have Gabe Davis stretching the field. And then if that's the case, right now he's fantasy tight end 12 or 13 based on the model's projection and the Fantasy Football Today experts consensus. But let's say he's a lot better than that. And then you have Buffalo significantly closing the gap with Kansas City in terms of winning the Super Bowl out of the AFC.
Right. When you talk about the other side of the ball with Von Miller, we have this idea that he will lead another dominant pass rush in another city. They average 3 sacks per game with him. I believe they averaged 2 without him. Derek, you can check me on that. Yep. But outside the top 10 in sacks the past 2 seasons without him really playing. And the idea is that if they can jump to a top 5 team in sack protection, then we can take this to 12.1 wins.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, obviously he's an older player and he's coming off a serious injury from last year, and that usually doesn't trend to recapturing in this case, his Denver form or even his Rams form. But, he's certainly capable of it. And especially if he is healthy down the stretch.
Right.
Because making the playoffs shouldn't be the issue for them.
Yeah. No. So with Von Miller, the passer, the opposing quarterbacks passing touchdowns and the interception ratio was 1.08 when Von Miller played in those 11 games. When he didn't play, that shot right up to 1.75 for the quarterbacks in their touchdown to interception ratio. So they gave up nearly 2 touchdowns for every interception that the opposing team has passed for touchdowns or intercepted, which is not good. That was in the bottom 10 in the league, but with Von Miller they were in the top 4 in the passer, touchdown, and interception ratio. So he makes a dramatic difference for this defense.
Right. So that wraps it up for our 4 teams for today. We're going to stay in NFL, but we're going to head over to some fantasy. We're going to end out with our wide receivers. So we've talked about receivers on Fantasy Football Today across CBS, and obviously those guys have great insight too, but we wanted to show you guys where we see value that not necessarily other people have. Some sneaky picks for your fantasy football teams. This is a list of receivers that we find unique value on.
Yeah, I wanted to spotlight this data because it's this kind of analysis that actually kind of spurred a lot of the ideas for this show. A year ago, we were putting in notes explaining to a lot of the people behind the scenes here why our projections why we were different for certain players week to week than the experts were. And I thought it's more interesting if we actually share that with the general public than just 4 people behind the scenes. So what we do internally is I look at our projection-based rank and compare it to the Fantasy Football Today consensus rank. And then we look for differences that are enough to alter one's, in this case, draft decisions, or on a weekly basis, start-sit decisions. And so what I'm hoping that we'll have plenty of questions in the chat going forward, knowing that once I explain how we do this type of analysis, please flood us, or flood Derek and Mackenzie, with as many questions that you have so we can start actually answering them in future episodes. So what I highlighted some numbers. I shouldn't use the word deviant. I Googled the definition of deviant. And I was trying to be clever with standard deviation, but then deviant is like, ugh, it's not the right one. But anyway, it's too late now. We made a graphic on it. What we're showing here is +4 for Devontae Adams means our projected ranking for him is 5th using PPR, which is the standard these days. The Fantasy Football Today consensus is 9th, so that's why he's +4. So in this case, the most deviant positively way is Amari Cooper, who we have at 14th, and he's 25th only in their rankings. These numbers are going to highlight on, especially week to week, where we're looking at our low and high from a weekly basis. So Godwin, for example, who has the highest low percentage, but the lowest high percentage, is because he is not a high touchdown receiver dependent production. He's all about receptions and yards. Versus Jahan Dotson, who's the opposite. He's all about touchdown production. So he's a low floor, high ceiling type player. And so what I want to do for now, while we have time permitting, is go through a couple reasons why we might like a player more than our experts do, or why our experts like a player more than we do. In the case of Davante Adams, they do have two new wide receivers, Hunter Renfrow back from injury, and Jacoby Myers added. So that'll cut into the wide receiver target share. But Darren Waller's gone, and I know he didn't play a lot last year. But the biggest – so I think that the FFT guys are saying, it's going to be fewer targets. They're not – maybe don't believe in Jimmy G's deep ball as much. And I think that's true. So if you look at it, our projected Davante Adams – average per game is significantly down versus 2022 average. But I think that the overall improvement in the passing game and the offense in general, and potentially fewer carries with the issues going around at running back with get him in camp, and whether they want to save him, whether he wants to carry the ball less for the sake of his next contract. They only averaged 34 pass attempts a game last year. I think that could be up to the 38 in 2021. If this offense is running right, it might be closer to 40. And so we can make up for the few lower percentage of targets with greater volume. The Cooper, similar situation. We have Cooper higher rated. He was based on average per game. He had the 19th highest average. So the experts have him 5 or 6 spots below that. We have him 5 spots above that. I think that the experts are concerned that Cooper had a little injury early in camp, and that Elijah Moore was added, and they're pretty high on him as a top 50 wide receiver, and that cuts into Cooper's target share. But the model's banking on improvement from the passing game overall, with Deshaun Watson more comfortable, and almost 500 more passing yards than last year, and 5 more passing touchdowns than last year. So even if Cooper's percentage and share goes down a little bit, this significant increase, almost 15% increase in the key metrics for receptions, yards, and touchdowns keeps Cooper as a high rated player. Right. How are you feeling, Derek? I know the Browns are your team, unfortunately for you.
Well, I think with Cooper, he's still going to get his touches. It's going to be more passing. So in the last season of Deshaun Watson with the Houston, they passed the ball 62.3% of the time. So they slowly increased at the end of last year for the Browns to like 53 to 58% at the end of the season of throwing the ball. So if they throw the ball more, and then they have more targets for Elijah Moore and for Cooper, Cooper's still going to get his amount of touches. I don't think it's going to go down. Yeah. But he's going to have more opportunities. And then also David Njoku, long as he stays healthy, he gets a lot of double teams and then a lot of attention from the safety. So you can't really double Cooper all the time because those other guys are going to be open. Oh, and also this guy by the name of Nick Chubb is going to be in running routes too. So who wants to, try and handle someone that's about squat like 900 to 1,000 pounds? So yeah, it's going to be hard for people to double team Cooper. So that's why he should have the ranking that we have.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry, real quick, Steven, you talk about these teams that have a pretty elite wide receiving core, which can be tough to, should you be taking these wide receiver twos, even though they're individually talented too? We got a question about the target share between Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, which is something Fantasy Football Today was talking about. Is Jalen Waddle, still a valuable pick given Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, so we have, I don't have the targets published on this little table, but we have their let's see. I have Waddle at 102 targets and Hill at 135. So, the model is slightly down, not meaningfully down. We have Tyreek Hill as wide receiver 4. Experts have him at 3. Waddle at 13. Experts have him 11. This is all because of Miami's really tough opposing pass defenses. We've talked about Tua having a disappointing season potentially because the opposing team on average is the 12th best passer rating defense in the league. So, they have a bunch of playoff teams on their schedule. The non-playoff teams from last year include the Jets and Patriots and elite defenses. So we think that's why we have both underrated, but based overall, still well worth drafting if they're available.
And you talk about, the quarterbacks and the trouble they're going to have. We don't have a lot of data on Love probably, which LaMelo was saying, but anything on Christian Watson and what kind of put him at?
So when we get to the Packers, in our over scenario, he's one of the players we're focusing on. We have Watson at wide receiver 21, our most recent projection. It's a little worse than the 17th. I think the experts had him at 20th until very recently. So maybe something happened recently that they moved him up. He was a top based on average. If you looked at his last, I believe 7 games where he started tearing it up, he would have been a top 10 wide receiver. So I think that there might be some safer bets because you really don't know what Jordan Love is going to be. Could be, I could imagine, I know in the preseason it was Romeo Doubs who got the touchdown that he threw. Again, I'm just not clued in enough to the deep ball of Jordan Love. I don't remember that success in college. He's certainly not Aaron Rodgers-esque.
Well, Christian Watson is the most talented out of all of those receivers. And so he's as far as what I've been reading and seeing, he's really good at running routes. So if he's good at running routes, depending on how Love, is comfortable with the mid-range to deep balls, he should be okay. But yeah, we really don't have a lot of data because he really didn't start a lot. And then also to touch back on Jalen Waddle and Hill, Waddle has more targets per game than Hill does. So that should stay about the same because he had 11.6 targets per game for Waddle, and Tyreek Hill was, I just had it here, was 9.
So one thing about Watson, again, he's going to be a boomer bust player. This is his week 1 projection. In week 1, we have him at 12.5 fantasy points, which is, basically the same as, at number 11, 12. But you look at his floor, his low estimate of 4.6. That's way lower than the guys around him. Godwin's 1 spot up, and that's up over a point higher in the floor. But his high, his kind of ceiling for that week is 22.3, which is higher than a lot of people ranked in the top ranked ahead of him. So, he's got on a weekly basis could just as easily finish in the top 10 as out of the top 50.
Right. So if you go back to your list, Stephen, of your 14 players, maybe, who would you think, give me like your top 2, this is a sleeper play. This is somebody that has more value that we think is worth taking in the early rounds.
I'm going to focus on Hollywood Brown. Arizona's going to be a disaster, we think, and I think all signs they probably are going to maybe tank for Caleb Williams. But he should get what he didn't get in Baltimore, which is when you're a bad team that's behind, even if you want to run the ball, you can't afford to.
Right.
And even if you have even if Kyler's out and Colt McCoy gets hurt again, they're going to have to throw it, and he should have this ridiculous target share. Games last year when Hopkins wasn't there, he had over 10 targets a game. Then Hopkins came back, and that dropped down to around 7.5 or 8. Hopkins is obviously gone, and so I think that he'll have just incredible volume. So that's why we have him at wide receiver 25, and the experts have him down to 34th. Health is a concern, but he this is a contract year. This is a big year for Hollywood Brown to try to get 100 receptions and just rack up individual stats, which is what he's sort of into. The other player I wanted to bring up, because I'm a homer for Baltimore, is Zay Flowers. So he's someone that we have him at wide receiver 50, and that's where the experts had him pretty much all summer. Peter King came out a week ago saying that after the first 6 or 7 camps he had been to, Zay Flowers is by far the most impressive rookie he'd seen. And then he's now up to wide receiver 40 on the experts list. I think Zay Flowers is awesome. I think he torched a bunch of Commanders DBs in the joint practice today. I was watching before this. I wasn't preparing for the show. I was watching highlights from the joint practice, which included an OBJ, like 25-yard catch from Lamar. But all Ravens fans were solely jacked when Zay Flowers' preseason debut, and he had 1 carry for 1 yard, according to the stat line. That carry was a backward pass where he made the linebacker completely whiff, and he got a 1 yard instead of losing 6. And then he drew 2 or 3 penalties, holding penalties, because he's so unstoppable and he can change direction so quickly at the line of scrimmage that he's so short that he got a hand to the face because the corner tries to jam him, hits him in the face by accident, or he gets by him and he's getting grabbed. There's no way you can ever double team him, given the number of weapons you have. So the Baltimore special, going back to Joe Flacco to Torrey Smith, was the pass interference. For every long pass Torrey Smith caught, he probably got PI twice. And that was part of our offense. So I think Zay Flowers is going to have a huge impact, but he might get a lot of pass interferences and holding penalties on the defense that don't count towards his individual fantasy stats. So that's why our projection may be a little lower than people like to think or hope.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we have some of our own picks to go along with, of course, all the other analysts at CBS, but these are sleeper picks that probably other people aren't thinking about, and we'll have plenty of fantasy picks next week too. But we want to talk about a quick teaser. A few of us will be on Thursday to do some college football win totals. Jake has plenty of knowledge on this on top of baseball, so he has a lot to say, and myself and Jake and maybe a few others will be doing a college football segment on Thursday, just a quick casual. But if you guys have questions about specific college football teams or any MLB daily picks, we can hit that too. Leave them in the chat, leave them on our Twitters. We want to make this Thursday casual show about you guys on top of Jake's locks for the season.
Can I say what it really is? I was told yesterday I probably talk too much. So this is just me trying to say, okay, let's Jake. There you go, genius. You take real time. All right. And we'll all get to just go on, drone on and on and on.
All right. This will be the true behind the scenes of us in the office, how all these numbers come to life. So be ready for Thursday. Stay tuned for more details on that. Come up with your questions, leave them here, leave them on any of our Twitters. We'll see you guys next Thursday, but hopefully we'll see a lot of you. We'll see you next Tuesday. Hopefully we see a lot of you on Thursday as well. So as always, good luck with your MLB bets today, and we will see you next week.